So Israel has been off limits to tourists and other foreigners all the way since the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. This did briefly change for a few weeks in November of 2021. And as it turns out, I was able to visit during that brief period of time, that brief window when they allowed foreigners in. I visit because I had a business trip, but I was also with my father. We were able to go and see some of the best sites in Israel, and it was empty. There were no tourists there. In this video, I'm going to show you the experiences that I had kind of by fluke going there just during a period of time where there was nobody around. It felt like going to Disneyland in the morning when nobody is there. It was a unique experience, and who knows when Israel's going to open back up again. But enjoy this video showing you the sights of Israel during COVID. Let me start off with a very popular place in Jerusalem, and that is the Garden Tomb, which is believed by many to be the place where Jesus was crucified and then buried. Now, this place, if you come pre-COVID, it is busy to the tune of hundreds and hundreds of people where you are going to be waiting in a queue. And I was astounded at how few people were here compared to the last time I visited back in 2018. In fact, my father and I just walked up and started taking pictures and videos of the tomb, whereas in the past, you're going to wait in a queue for at least a half hour just to take a quick picture and walk inside. Now, this is a neat place. It definitely has a cool feel to it, and there is some historical controversy as to whether or not this is the actual tomb of Jesus. Nevertheless, it's a very popular spot, and it was neat to see this without all of the tourists and people on a religious pilgrimage that usually come here and make this a very crowded spot. Next up is the Western Wall, or Wailing Wall. And even before COVID, you can come up here and watch as faithful practitioners of Judaism worship. It was far less crowded than last time, and it was a neat experience to be here. Even though there were many people still praying, it was neat to see this not as crowded as it normally is. One of the most memorable experiences was going with my father to the Temple Mount. This, of course, may be the most famous spot in all of Jerusalem, looking at the mosque there and the Dome of the Rock, and we were virtually alone. There was nobody else in the plaza, nobody else in the whole area. This, I think, would be extraordinarily unusual pre-COVID. And although I will say we were here fairly early in the morning, even then it seemed quite unusual. I imagine if we'd have come later in the day, we would have seen some people, but this was a unique experience to be so alone in such a world-famous place. This video here was filmed back in 2018, the last time I was at the Dead Sea. There are some resorts down there, and as you can see, it was pretty crowded. A lot of tourists enjoying bathing in the Dead Sea. Compare and contrast to what it looked like recently. With COVID, nobody around, and had the place almost to ourselves. A few other swimmers, but mostly to ourselves. No, that is not Luke Skywalker, even though this guy really looked a lot like him. This is actually the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, located right in the heart of Jerusalem. This is far and away the most sacred spot if you're a Catholic, where they believe Christ was not only crucified, but also where he was buried. They have the tomb of Jesus, which I'll show you here in just a minute. But this is a neat spot to come, and if you come normally, it is absolutely crowded with tourists. This time, a few people, and there was a procession going on, but for the most part, empty compared to what it normally is. I created another YouTube video a few years ago where I discussed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and compare it to the Garden Tomb and one other place where it's believed that the crucifixion may have occurred. If you're interested, I'll link to that. Now, what you're looking at right here is considered the tomb of Jesus. If you come here, normally you will find waits within the church. You've got to wait about an hour or so to queue up before you have an opportunity to go into this little spot, and they only give you a few seconds. Last time I was here, I waited in line a half an hour, and then I had to leave. I didn't even have time to go into this sacred spot. This time, the wait was about 2 minutes, and I was in and out very quickly. I got to experience it, and I was grateful. This right here is the Church of the Nativity located in Bethlehem. And I'm going to walk right down here to what is believed to be the manger. Now, I don't know about the historical authenticity of this place, but I do know that last time I was here, I waited an hour in line just for this moment of about 10 seconds. This time around, no wait whatsoever. In fact, you see my father right there. But a few of the other people in the background of this video are tour guides. There were a few other tourists there, but for the most part, these are people that live in Bethlehem. If you go to Bethlehem, you need to be a little bit aware that you're leaving Israel proper and going into the West Bank or the Palestinian area. You'll go through some security gates. It's not a big deal, but you just need to be a little bit cautious and aware. You are going to find a lot of different street hustlers, a lot of different vendors, and many touts that will try to ask you questions and be your tour guide. They'll even linger around you and insist that you tip them or insist that you go into their shop. And they're very good at using some almost psychological measures to make you feel guilty if you don't purchase from them. So be aware of that. Now, in my case, I did let this guy take me around a little bit, and I did buy a nativity scene from him. And he took me back into this shop and showed me how the nativity scenes were made, which was kind of cool. Obviously, he wanted me to buy a whole bunch more stuff, and I did buy some things from him, but they do dial up the pressure and dial up the guilt if you don't completely patronize their store. And I will also say that even in Old Town Jerusalem, that there are some aggressive vendors that may really pester you to buy from them. It's not just in the Palestinian area. It can be a lot of different places. I do find that the times I've been to Bethlehem, they do seem particularly aggressive in Bethlehem, and it may be because there's so few tourists there right now, but just be aware. And this guy was helpful. It was really neat to see these nativities being made, and I did leave him with a pretty generous tip, but be cautious. Be cautious, but at the same time, buy a nativity, because where else are you going to get a more authentic nativity scene than Bethlehem? This place is one of my favorites in all of Jerusalem. It is the Garden of Gethsamane, where Christ bled from every pore the day before he was crucified. Now, if you come here normally, it's not usually a busy place where it's super crowded, but there's always people around. Nowadays, during COVID, you'll have the place all to yourself. When in Israel, you'll most certainly go to Nazareth, the hometown of Jesus. It's located about 2 hours north of Jerusalem. Now, what to do in Nazareth? There is the Church of the Annunciation, which is shown here. It's the main attraction. It's a Catholic church, a newer Catholic church built in the 1960s. But it's beautiful. There's some artwork and mosaics to see. And I had the place almost entirely to myself. There were a few other people roaming around, but no crowds whatsoever during COVID. I will say, Nazareth is very different than you might think. It's not a quaint little village. It's a bustling and busy town, but absolutely worthwhile to come and see this place. If you were to ask me where is my favorite place in all of Israel, I would almost certainly tell you the Sea of Galilee. I actually love this place, and particularly the northern end, which includes the city of Capernaum, and this place, which is up on the hill, the Mount of Beatitudes, and there's a Church of Beatitudes up here. Beautiful gardens, beautiful sights, and this is historic because if you read the Bible, particularly the New Testament, this is where Jesus became popular. This is where he started and spent most of his time in his ministry, preaching the Sermon on the Mount and teaching the people, healing the sick. A lot of those stories from the New Testament relating to Jesus' life happened right here. As you can see, we were almost entirely by ourselves as we toured through Capernaum and the areas around the Sea of Galilee. There was just nobody around. In fact, we saw one tour guide operator, and he only had 2 couples with him, whereas normally you would come here and you would have buses full of people. You can see the seating here. Normally people would be worshiping or listening, becoming educated on the life of Jesus. In fact, one parking lot was just entirely empty, and normally there's slots for about a dozen different tour buses that come through this area. And so I feel bad somewhat for the tour guide operators, but at the same time, I'm very grateful in my heart that I had a chance to come through this place with my father and see such a neat and such a holy place, really, almost entirely by ourselves. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was an amazing experience to go to Israel and see these 10 places that I've shown you without crowds. I don't know that I'll ever have that chance again. I do think I want to mention a few things about Israel's COVID protocol, because Israel, although it's closed again because of this Omicron variant, it's likely to reopen sooner or later. And when they do, I anticipate that they're going to have some of the same protocols. And you need to be aware of them. First of all, you need to be tested within 72 hours before your arrival. You also need to be vaccinated. There's no chance you're going to get into Israel without being vaccinated. Next, and this is a little bit unusual compared to countries in Europe, you need to have a test again once you arrive in the airport. You need to pay for that test and be tested once again. They won't even let you leave the airport. They'll give you a wristband and make sure you can't even leave unless you've had that second test. You go into a brief quarantine for just a few hours at your hotel, and then once you receive that negative test, you can go and be on your own. And once you're complete with that, it's pretty easy going. I will say that the one thing I didn't like is you also have to be tested on the way out. You have to get a test 72 hours before leaving Israel, and that can be a real hassle because there's not a lot of testing centers. The main one is at the airport. So when Israel reopens, absolutely try to go see it, especially if you have the opportunity to see it and you can do it without these big crowds. It was an amazing experience, but be aware of the protocols. Israel is far more strict than most places when it comes to COVID and some of the restrictions. Hope you enjoyed the video.